Hi everybody, welcome to this Patreon video. This is not going to be a time lapse, this is going to be a real-time video. So in the next 30 minutes or so, you're gonna see me create this 6x6 inch sketch. I do like 5 or 6 of them every single month, and this month it was dark crystal. So this is me laying down the sketch for a SkekSil, the Chamberlain in this instance. For this I'm using my Graph Gear 100 mechanical pencil, and it's just one of my favorites. As you know, I use it all the time. I use a very light hand when sketching because I do not want to scratch up the paper. It's just to give an indication where I want to have my lines and some darker areas. So it's just general shape, doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm just laying down the guidelines, so to speak. When I sketch, it's very important to keep my lines just very light. Well, not really light, but my hand really light, so I don't really scratch the surface. So if I do need to make adjustments, which I sometimes do, and in this case I will do, because you'll see me crack out the needed eraser in a bit. There's no shame in doing that, absolutely no shame. This doesn't need to be perfect. It's just a sketch, and treat it as such. There's nothing precious about it. Let's call it like that. It's not meant to be a masterpiece, but more like, for me, when I sketch, or watercolor sketches, things like this, I just want to learn something. I want to try new things. I want to master the medium a little better. So this is just me trying to figure out how the brow works of this creature. And as you know, the SkekSils were based on birds like vultures and things like that. And even you can see, they always remind me of chickens as well. It's so funny. So I really enjoyed drawing these creatures because of their gnarly faces. Anyway, the sketch is done, and what I do next is just dab in some water and go in with the first layers of colors. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect. It's just basically what I'm doing now is I'm sketching with watercolor. So using those lines I've laid down earlier, I'm just filling in the areas basically, and it's just sketching with the paint. And you don't really need to be precious again. Use like the medium. Use the technique wet and wet. Have some areas blend perfectly together. Some colors you can see that are just blending nicely together. And I'm using an online image of the Chamberlain as a reference, and I see a lot of purples and a lot of blues in that picture. So that's gonna be my palette. It's purples and blues and reds, stuff like that. And there's a slight hint of yellow in the beak as well, so that'll be added in a bit. And what I do mostly with these things, and basically any time I work with watercolors, is I just layer. You layer translucent layers of color. That's basically watercolor. And you can soften up edges, and because some areas are still wet, they blend perfectly, and it's so nice. So I'm working on the color a little, and that color can just blend into the head, so I'm not even bothered by the fact that the color is bleeding into the head slightly. But it's a shadow, so shadows have to be dark, so this is perfect for me. As you can see, I'm using just one brush. This is, I believe, my number 10 Escuda travel brush set, which I've recently bought, as you might know from previous videos or posts. I really love it. It soaks up a lot of water, has a nice sharp point, and because of that I can use it in different ways. So I can use it to really lay down a really generous wash of color or water, and the tip gives me something to sketch with, as you can see. I'm here just adding wrinkles, and it's I believe it just one of my favorite colors. I love shadow violet, and it's mixed with some purple and blues as well, but oh, a bit too pink there. That's opera pink, by the way, which is a wonderful color I used for the Sakura Fairy, but it's a bit too, it's very, very, very neon pink almost, and it doesn't always work, but for some reason I tend to use it a lot in flesh tones. It's great for just that subtle pinkish hue. At least that's what I use it for. So there's one of my secrets. So this side of the hand is obviously going to be in shadow, and the mouth, those parts are pretty much the darkest parts. So in the picture it's not really blue, but I don't really enjoy using black in pieces, so I rather use a mixture of shadow violet and some blues that I have. I really like Payne's Blue Grain, for instance. That's a really nice one. And it's just layering it. It's quite boring if you look at it like this, because the only thing I'm doing is building layers of color, which is pretty much what watercolor is. But you have to know when to stop as well, because I'm working on my fluid cold press paper, which I use for these sketches primarily because they're easy. They're not too heavy, so shipping it isn't too expensive. It's something to keep in mind as well. But it doesn't take a lot of water, or let's call it abuse. It doesn't take as much as abuse as, for instance, the Canson Moulin Rouge. Moulin Rouge. That's a movie. That's not what I meant. I meant Moulin du Roi. See, I don't speak French, and I pretty much botched up that word, but you get my drift. Sorry, lost the plot there. Basically, that paper can really stand some abuse by me. This, however, doesn't. So I need to know when to stop, and it doesn't always take as many layers. Okay, so just for the background, I generally just wash in some color, and since I want a darker color as the background, I'm just doing this. It's, you know, it's just to frame the creature a little along the edges. Good thing about this is you don't end up with a lot of the sketch marks there. So the sketch lines will disappear a little. So it dries sometimes, some areas dry faster than other areas, and you're left with this hard edge. This blue is kind of easy, and this paper is easy in that regard, because I can actually go in and add some water and just make sure that that hard edge disappears. So that's easier. It's always difficult to do a bigger area, cover a bigger area with dark color and to keep it even. Like for instance, really dark brown or black, it's practically impossible to get that spread even or covered even. There's always gonna be blotches and uneven things in the surface. So I'm adding water on this edge because this is the ruffles. These are the ruffles that's covering his neck. So I want it to be a little bit less hard edge than it is now. So by adding water, I let the pigment just run into the water, and it creates this nice and fluffy texture. Let's call it fluffy, yeah. And I do the same thing on the top of its head, because I think there's a couple of hairs there that I want to have also. It's just nicer. So as you can see, I'm adding more shadow, because basically that area has to be as dark as the background, because in the picture, which I will put up in this as well, is as dark as the background. So, and it's not about getting the perfect copy of the picture. That's just reference. That is something to keep on the side just for color and for shape, for instance. But in the end, it's all about your own interpretation. You don't have to blindly, well, it's not blindly, but like follow the reference. If you do that, if you follow your reference blindly, it's gonna be dead. You need to add your own voice to it, I think. And that's what I'm doing. It's just building. See, these marks aren't really there in the picture, but I like to just add some, because basically you're building layers and of color to create this feeling of dimension, of form. And so the eye socket as well, I've left that alone for now, but that needs to be as dark as the shadow as well, because that eye needs to pop out of its socket basically. And it sounds really horrid, but it needs to be, it's one of those, one of the lightest, most remarkable things in the whole thing, so it needs to like pop. But you can see I'm just sketching with my paintbrush. And this is actually, I believe, the smaller version. I think this is number 6. I think this is a number 6. I'm trying to find it, but the actual number is no longer visible on the paintbrush, because I've used it so often already and it's just worn off. So whether you believe me or not, I think it's a 6. Might be a 4, might be a 5. I haven't got a clue, but it works, which is the most important thing in this case. And you can see that most colors dry very dry lighter than they are when they're wet. It's one of those things that watercolor does. It looks really dark or darker when it's wet on the paper. And you think, oh, this is it, this is exactly what I want. And then when it dries, it's like, this wasn't supposed to be like that. but then you add more layers and just darken it. Add a bit of purple reddish around the eyes, so it's not too cool. Some areas of the mouth, red. There's actually a little brown in there as well, just to muddle it up a bit. So I hear a lot of people talk about how much they'd like to learn how to paint in watercolors, and just do not dare to touch the medium because they find it intimidating. And I actually had the opposite. I've always used watercolors actually, and I didn't have anyone teach me. I just picked it up, started using it, and obviously I've learned myself how to use it, and I'm not sure if I've learned the wrong way. I've learned what works for me. So there's no, sure, there's right ways and wrong ways and whatever, but I think that you can only learn watercolors by picking them up and trying out what works for you, trying out simple things, simple starting things, like what does pigment do in clean water? Like, what's the wet in wet technique? How do I soften edges? It's all these wanting to make it perfect, and there's basically nothing like it. There's people that are so good at watercolors. They are amazing at watercolors, and I see them every day. Basically, I see that's absolutely stunning in watercolors, and they have a technique that I do not possess. I have a different way of working with the stuff, and it works for me. So I always try and encourage people just to try it out, give it a go. And you don't have to spend a lot of money on very expensive brands of watercolor. I think I started out with some simple Van Gogh watercolor, which is basically student grade watercolors, and there's no problem in them. I wouldn't really recommend starting out with the high-end Sennelier or Daniel Smith or whatever. Don't spend 25 euros on a tube of watercolor paint when you're just starting out. If you want to do something and you want to try Daniel Smith, for instance, which I'm using primarily here, I'd say get those dot sheets that they have, because those dot sheets are amazing, and a little goes a long way with watercolors. Obviously you can't make pieces that are like enormous, like 2 meters in width or something, but you can make simple portraits such as this, and it's a great way to learn how to work with it and which colors you like. Another misconception a lot of people have is that watercolors don't allow you for making mistakes, and as you've seen, I've made a lot of mistakes in this piece already, and I've been editing it. Like, I've been erasing areas, I've been adding layers, I've been adding colors, I've been taking out colors, lifting it. Like, you can easily, if you add clean water to a certain area, depending on the color and depending on the paper, of course, there's all these things you have to keep in mind as well. But there is wiggle room for mistakes, and in cases like this, which is a watercolor sketch, it's not bad. There's no right or wrong. when it's a bigger piece that I want to do for a gallery or for Fairies of the Fault Lines or whatever, and it needs to be gallery worthy, let's call it that, yes, I do have to think ahead, and I do have to be mindful of where to put down color and where I want to keep whites of the paper. For instance, when you're painting mist, you don't want to add to fully like have your paper full of color. You don't want to do that. If you want to have a misty surroundings, you have to be mindful of that already. Anyway, back to the piece. So as you can see, I'm just adding some more wrinkles, and these are just trying to add some depth to the face of the SkekSil. Another one of the rules is you work from light to dark, because it's easier to go from light to dark than from dark to light, whereas in oils basically do whatever you like, or at least what my teacher used to tell me, because I did an atelier course in oil painting at the classical atelier in Bruges, which was amazing because I was afraid of painting in oils. It was so intimidating for me. I thought it was the medium of my heroes, such as Rembrandt or Vermeer. And I was really intimidated by that fact. But my teacher used to tell me, "Oh, don't worry, it's just oil. You rub it off." And but that's one of those things that I still remember every time I start painting in oils, because there's some freedom there that I don't have in watercolors. For some reason, there's always this restriction. It can be very tough to keep the looseness. Is that a word actually? To keep it loose in watercolor, to keep it flowing, which is really weird because you're using water, so it should be flowing. But it can become very stiff and rigid, and I personally like it when you let the water do its job, you let the pigment do its job, and there's not a lot of control happening. It's I always describe it as having a conversation with your piece. It's quite magical, actually. I really enjoy working with watercolors because you have control, and yet you don't have control. It's the illusion of having control. Whereas oils, it's so much easier to control those. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it's easier. Because if you make a mistake, it's just rub it off and start over again, or fake it. But watercolor isn't as forgiving. But again, like I said, it's so amazing to me that this is it. This is unique. This one piece is unique. I will never recreate this exact same brushstroke ever again. It's just not possible with watercolors. There's so many different variants that will make the outcome different. That's absolutely the charm for me. That is watercolors. It's the uniqueness of every stroke and of every piece. And well, back to this piece, because I'm nearing the end, I think. This is just wait for it, more layers. Are you getting sick and tired of that yet? So these SkekSils have a wonderful textured head with all these wrinkles and all these crevices, and it's wonderfully interesting to paint, and I enjoy painting things like this so much more because it's a challenge to make sure that something looks like it's been through the ringer. I like faults, I like wrinkles, they offer a challenge, whereas pretty pictures like stunning beautiful people or beautiful creatures are not as interesting to me because they don't have wrinkles. I like wrinkles, sue me. Probably not on myself though whenever I find one, but you know, hey, I can be a hypocritical person as well. These are just details. It's just adding more character. It's just defining the teeth, defining the tongue, defining the jawbone, the jawline. Sorry. And it's fun to see how he emerges from basically nothing. So here are some of the hairs, as you can see. Just use the tip of your brush, and it's quite loaded up with water and pigment, and it takes you a long way. So using a little bit of a dry brush technique idea here is just my brush is not as wet as I normally would use it, and by just dragging it across the dry paper, you create a texture because pigment is left in irregular fashion really, and it creates a texture that I like and is suitable for that lace color that's kind of deteriorated by time. If you remember correctly, the SkekSils have these elaborate wardrobes, like the garments are so lush and rich in velvet and gold, but it's all worn and tattered, and to create that illusion I use a dry brush technique there. That and the wet and wet, so it's a combination of techniques there. And the finishing touch is the eye. Well, not the finishing touch, but it's always very important when you're making a piece just to do the eye. And I normally don't use anything else but watercolors. I'm going in with some whites later on, with some I think it's acrylics. It's golden fluid acrylics I'm going to use in a bit. But normally I wouldn't do that, actually, because I find that in watercolor the only white you'll need is the white of the paper, but in this case I've overworked certain areas. I just want to pop them out a little bit by adding a little bit of this white paint. It's just in some areas, not too many. It's just to highlight those wrinkles a little. And you can see it's already better. A bit too much there, so add some water and just brush it out. I'm using a number 1 paintbrush, I think. Just make sure that you clean these thoroughly after using, because acrylics does tend to leave remnants in between the hairs and rendering them unsuitable for watercolors in a couple of uses if you don't clean them properly. And what I do from time to time is clean my brushes with special soap made for cleaning brushes. How surprising. But you can also use things like olive soap. I've done that, but recently, yeah, not so recently, but a while ago, I bought this fluid brush soap that I use for my oil painting brushes, oil brushes, whatever they're called. But as basically for all my brushes. And once in a while, my brushes get a spa treatment, and I just brush my brushes gently. And it sounds so weird, but it's so nice. And meditate. It's like a meditation. It's relaxing to do. Clean your brushes, because brushes are expensive, as you know, and taking good care of them will make them last longer, and it'll make sure that you have a lot of fun with your brushes for a long, long time to come. Just some highlights. So normally I wouldn't do this, because I would have left the paper as the white of this piece. But since I told you this is a sketch, and I think sometimes it needs something like this, and I'm just heading in, because at this point the paper is not taking any more color. So whenever I lay down some watercolors, it'll just lift up, and I just want to darken some areas just slightly, and I'm using one of my trusted Coloris pencils. This is Tuscan Red, actually, and I use it to darken some areas, the wrinkles, for instance. Just trace them along, put in the pupil. Wrinkles, more wrinkles. And all it needs now is a signature. And there you have it. And it's one SkekSil. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section. And I will see you guys soon.